Does anyone remember the Commodore 64? I'm definitely aging myself ever so slightly. Commodore 64 came out in 1982, sold at the time for $595, which is around $2,000 in today's money, equivalent to today's money. And it was kind of a lot of people's first foray into having a personal computer, a computer within their own homes, which previously to this was sort of an unthinkable task to take something which was a business machine and now have it in your home. And at the time, there was a lot of talk about how this is going to change everything. People are going to lose their jobs because now we have computers that can fit inside of our homes. And it feels a lot, you can kind of probably tell where I'm going, Matthew. It feels a lot like the conversations we have today around AI, that, oh, this really powerful thing, now that it's at the scale that it is, whatever current context length that we've got, that's going to ruin lives or create lives or ruin jobs or create new industries. And I think back to what has happened with personal computers in the last 40 years. They've become the part of our lives. There's certainly jobs that don't exist today that existed before because of it. But in large part, more jobs have been created, more industry has been created because of computing and now phones and everything else that's even led to AI than we would have had without it. And we kind of are talking about that same type of thing today on the podcast about AI. And we just wrapped up with the conversation with Akash Ganapathi, who's the CEO of Opine. And I have a couple things that I need to go and research. I don't know about you, Matthew. I have a couple things to take a look at that I've not even heard of going into this call.
Absolutely. And look, the age thing here or there, we've looked it up. Looks like the Commodore 64 was phased out in 1994, the year that I was born. So it had about a decade run. And just like you were saying, kind of changed how everyone was thinking about work and the home. So I have a feeling that AI will probably stick around more than a decade. But where the winners were in that time were the people who could figure out adoption in its early stages. And I would safely say we are in the early stages of AI. And that's what we get into today. How can you be an early stage winner and adopter if you are a leader at a pre-sales org?
Absolutely. And our guest today, I mentioned already, so Akash Ganapathi, CEO of Opine. He's previously a senior director, head of solution architecture before he started Opine. So he comes from the pre-sales space as well. He was at Jupiter One. If you're familiar with if you're in the cybersecurity space, you're familiar with them. He's actually a 2-time startup founder in the AI space, building his first AI company in the 2010s. So again, in a previous iteration of what we talked about with AI, which is also something that we talk about in the show, he has a deep passion for how AI can really assist augmenting technical experts and help them scale, which is a lot of what we talk about in the show today. Anything else you think I should mention, Matthew, before we kick off the episode?
Keep an ear out if you are at an early stage or an enterprise stage company for tips on how you should be thinking about AI. But Jack, let's jump right into it after the break.
Thank you, Opine, for sponsoring this episode. SEs, let's be real. You didn't sign up for this job to babysit spreadsheets, play email tag, or spend your life updating CRMs. Your time is worth more than that. That's why Opine exists, to automate the admin work and let AI handle the chaos so you can focus on what actually wins deals, strategic selling. Here's how it works. Opine's AI syncs with Slack, Gong, Zoom, email, and your CRM, automatically analyzing deal context, summarizing calls, and ensuring every proof of value, or POC, stays on track before you or your stakeholders even think about it. Performance tracking? Done. Stakeholder updates? Opine auto updates stakeholders, scores deal risks, and delivers real-time reporting without you lifting a finger. While other platforms still make you manually update everything, Opine pulls it all together so you spend less time on admin and more time closing. The future of pre-sales isn't manual, it's AI-powered. See for yourself at tryopine.com, where pre-sales work flows. So, Akash, welcome to the Pre-Sales Podcast. Happy to have you here.
Glad to be here. Really appreciate it, Jack. Matt, good to be here.
Today's topic, and I'm really excited for this, is about tailoring AI for growth, specifically thinking about what startups need to do differently. I love this topic because it's a little bit of a different take on just AI tooling, what you need to think about. Specifically, when you're thinking about growth, how do you handle that? So I guess out of the gate, I'd love to get kind of your take on this from a big picture perspective. Why is it different than what enterprises need to consider? What's different with AI and specifically a pre-sale strategy when you're at a startup and thinking about growth?
I think the big difference to me is the specialization of roles. So in large organizations, there's deep specialization. There might be demo engineers that are just purely in charge of managing the demo environment. There's like solutions architects, specialists, there's sales engineers, and these all have slightly different roles within the pre-sales function. And then you have, at a startup, just like an everyman, right? That's like really quite general, wearing multiple hats, sometimes doing product management, sometimes doing post-sales work, even marketing work. Sometimes it can get really quite wide depending on the size of the org. So what I think most folks don't account for is just how much AI can change a job description. So at a larger org, every single one of those roles really needs their own AI strategy in a sense of how it's going to modify and accelerate that job to be done. Whereas at a smaller org, you can really just say, hey, here's a generic tool like ChatGPT for Teams, and here's an OpenAI API key, or a budget for Open Router or Clay, and just kind of just go crazy, just do whatever you want. And taking that approach at a larger org is just begging for chaos and redundant efforts. But at a smaller org, that could actually work.
Yeah. How have you seen that come across? I guess it sounds like you've had some conversations with people at different stages of the org. I'm especially interested for our smaller pre-sales teams. What have you seen work well for them?
I'll just use this kind of recent example. I was just listening to a podcast, CRO of a public company, $9 billion in revenue. And they said they would take a bottoms-up approach to their AI strategy, basically giving all of the sales folks in the entire revenue org licenses to like general tools like enterprise search and workflow automations, and just letting them go nuts. And you can just imagine, like as I can, how many of them are wasting time on the same projects, right? Like everyone's doing account research and everyone's doing meeting prep and everyone's doing some flavor of just email automation or something like that. And they're all working on the exact same thing, and there's no actual enablement at scale happening. Now, the ironic thing is, I think that would actually work really well at a small startup where you don't actually know who's going to have the good AI ideas. So that's kind of one of the big equalizers in this revolution of LLMs and agentic automation, is that anyone can have a good idea, and it could be possible for them to create a valuable process that's automated or a workflow that's automated. And at a startup, I think that's one of their biggest advantages, is that you can just talk across the levels so easily. No one's going to be wasting time working on the same thing. You can like share ideas really easily. Everyone in the org can be on the same page, and you can really just leverage some pretty general tooling. Like, let's just get a license for OpenAI's API and use something like Open Router and just start stitching stuff together, connecting it to data, and see what we can do to help us do our day-to-day jobs. And I'd say that's been what I've seen really work at smaller companies that are not planning for large growth. But if you are planning for large growth, that's a whole nother question.
It kind of reminds me of the whole giant public company just buying every employee a license. Feels kind of like on Christmas when you were a teenager and your parents would get you like your first toolkit, like it's got a hammer and a screwdriver and it's got those drywall plugs in it, and it's just got lots of miscellaneous stuff that you open this. I remember I got one and going, thanks. Like, I'm not suddenly a handyman because I got this toolkit. You couldn't tell me to go hang a shelf and I could take this and go, now I can do it. But that's kind of what it feels like when you've got these bigger companies and they're just kind of handing these licenses out. Now you have access to everything. Great. It doesn't mean I know what to do with it. But I think you're right. That collaborative, if you give a toolbox to a team of people who they're there specifically to be scrappy, that you have to be at startups and figure things out, that toolkit, I feel like, is going to go a lot farther. Oh, wait, I know how to use those, or we can look up how to use that. These are our tools and we have to use them because we have such limited resources. It's almost that scarcity mindset to get stuff done.
Yeah, 100%. I would agree with that.
When you're thinking about AI implementation, then with these teams, right? I love thinking about, okay, so we're just going to figure out how to make some tooling work, especially when you're at a startup. Is there anything that you've heard people say about AI, maybe that's like, oh no, this is something that you shouldn't be doing, that you think is kind of more of a myth, more of a, actually it's good if you do that if you're a startup or if you're a small growth company, because it's different from when you're big? I mean, you talked about one, just the getting everyone a license makes sense to do. Are there any others like that?
So I'll answer both questions. There's one that's like, are there any myths? And then I think the other side of it is like, are there things that you should just definitely be doing besides just enable people with tools and see what they do on the startup side? I'd say the biggest myth that I'm hearing just consistently across PreSales, whether it's a startup or an enterprise, is just this idea of the AI SE that's like basically going to replace the SE function, right? And I think to some degree, it's bad marketing, you know what I mean? Where someone's decided, yeah, automating away the SE, that sounds catchy and good for raising VC dollars, but ultimately it doesn't track. I think in general, there's not actually that many jobs in pre-sales that are going to totally disappear, in my opinion, like end to end, if any, thanks to AI, right? I think there's going to be very specific parts of the job that can be automated, right? And like people are going to get a lot of scale and efficiency, velocity to their process. And it's a lot more practical to focus on like what subsets of the job are really going to get automated versus like saying something like, here's an AI SE to just solve all your SE problems. And by SE problems, I mean, just get rid of your SEs or whatever they're really pitching at. I just don't understand. I don't think it's possible.
So like the ones you see where it's an avatar popping up and I can do a live demo for you. Ask me a question and I'll pivot to it. Those types of tooling that you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different tools marketing themselves this way, and it boils down to a few different flavors of things. One is what you just described, like the call assistance, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm just going to answer customer questions just on the side. I'll be a little sidekick on the live recording. It's like an enablement tool. I think they all boil down to flavors of sales enablement, and they simplify the SE role to basically being like, well, they're just there to be technical product knowledge on the call. That's basically all they do, is answer technical questions for the customer. And I think that's almost no SE's job description, is just answering technical questions, right? There's so much more to the role with respect to putting together a solution, having like a value narrative that you're conveying, like building a relationship with technical stakeholders, not to mention like running implementations or proof of concepts or any other type of deep evaluation that might be required, workshops, like solutioning, consulting, all these things that come into play. And ultimately, these tools are basically just knowledge base question and answer chats.
Great for helping with like onboarding. I could even see that like, yeah, okay, we're accelerating your onboarding, but we're still onboarding a person. We're not no longer needing the person to onboard.
I mean, you could even think of like, this is how far we have come so far in AI. AI is pretty good at looking over a group of material and coming up with a summary or even finding specific parts of that material. It sounds like, Akash, you're describing that next stage of making a solutions consultant really sharp. That's where they then take knowledge that they've heard from other stakeholders and know where to apply it to actually make some things happen, right? Whether it's the solution you mentioned or going to the product teams or other technical stakeholders. That's the part where I don't think we've seen AI step so much into it yet. But maybe you've seen something else. And how do you approach, I guess, pushing the boundaries and what's on the fringe next for where this is going for AI and pre-sales?
I'd say like it's worth stepping back a little bit and just drilling into a point that you started talking to, which is like, what is AI even good at right now? What do we mean when we're saying AI? There's a lot of history to AI, right? So we could be talking about quantitative modeling and statistical modeling from the 90s, you know what I mean? That they called statistical learning. And then we could be talking about machine learning type models as they called it through like the 2000s and 2010. Now we have large language models, and people are really talking about natural language processing, as it used to be called in the early 2000s or late 2010s or whatever, now called large language models and in large. And so the shift in what AI means has really gone from very quantitative analysis to very qualitative analysis. But you really could be talking about either or. And the breakthrough in quantitative models was really back in, like, I don't know if y'all remember the AlphaGo type of breakthroughs, reinforcement learning, and like, you know, we beat, like the computers finally became better than humans at Go, and like that whole world, right? And then this type of qualitative breakthrough, right? Like the wordsmithing was more like the 2022 type breakthroughs of ChatGPT and all that. And so most of the time when we're talking about AI now, we're talking about LLMs. And it's worth just saying like, that's what we'll be talking about for the most part on this show, mostly because I think that's where everyone's trying to figure out what's the new alpha, right? Like, what can we now put on our processes? What can we automate and so on? That's related to unstructured context, qualitative analysis, subjective analysis and things like that. And when it comes to the boundaries, right, of the AI today, there's kind of like two major factors, I'd say. One is in terms of context windows. So not to get super technical, so I'll keep it high level, but basically whichever models we're using, whether it's like ChatGPT 5 or ChatGPT previously 4.0, and like, they have their submodels and Gemini has their models and so on. They all have different context windows. Basically, how much information can you throw at the LLM that it's able to like accurately deal with at like a 99.9% type of accuracy of remembering what you said to it and speaking to it correctly. And that context window is super important because it's about 1 million tokens in the best model today. And that's realistically not that much context. You know what I mean? It's like some really big books, like War and Peace and stuff like that is like the full context window. But when you start thinking about, well, all of the context of my customers and my prospects and all their use cases and everything I've ever spoken to about across my entire revenue org, suddenly that context is like super massive, especially for an enterprise. Not so massive for a startup, but super massive for an enterprise. There's no way it's like living in this single context window, like very quickly. It does not, especially if you want to analyze some really complex questions. And so there's this kind of secondary technology. I think many people have probably seen the acronym and heard it. It's called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. But, it's worth talking about the limitations of it, right? So Retrieval Augmented Generation, basically you rely on a secondary model. It's called an embeddings model, and you feed it data, documents, integrations, things like that. And you like try and give it more context, things to catch up on later. We don't have to get into the very specifics of it, but the best in class retrieval is not 99.9%. It's like 75% accurate. So there's like legitimately like a steep fall off when it comes to trying to remember stuff outside the context, is what I'm getting to. Long story short, AI can only be so accurate today. And while it's really good at making sure people don't forget things and that they're like enabled on certain content and so on, you really need a person to like make sure that work is getting done at the level of quality that's required, unless it's like a really, really simple task. Ultimately, what that boils down to is there needs to be a major breakthrough in context window size. There needs to be a major breakthrough in retrieval techniques for accuracy of data retrieval from these LLM to actually automate away a person. And that breakthrough doesn't look very likely right now, just from like the experts in the field, like Jan LeCun and he leads, AI at Meta, and others just are actually extremely skeptical of when that breakthrough will happen. There's no timeline, despite Sam Altman might be like, really saying stuff for what it's worth.
What's interesting to me about that conversation is it very much mirrors the conversation that was being had in the 70s and 80s around personal computers. As personal computing started to become, I suppose that would be more late 70s, early 80s, right? Started to become more, people think about actually having a computer in their house. The thought being, okay, at what tasks or what people are going to be completely eliminated now that we have PCs in our homes? And a lot of the limitations were, well, we're not quite there yet from a power and a size and a memory perspective. We're at like 1,000x, even more the capacity now. Like what you can have even in your phone, in your pocket, is thousands of times faster and more powerful. But still to this day, it's not been a human removed from the equation. Instead, it has become a tool alongside. And I think even that's indicative, because I think we're not that far away. If you really look at, even just the progression of, GPT-3 to 4, 4.0 to 5, like the context window grew substantially. Like I remember at this time last year, we were talking in thousands of tokens being the context window. Like if you had a conversation that lasted over 5, 6, 7 prompts, the first prompt would be gone by the time you got to the 7th prompt. Like that's where we were at a year ago. Whereas now you can have very long conversations without it forgetting the initial part of the conversation anymore. So like, we're getting there. And I think even when we get to the point where, let's say an enterprise as big as, IBM, all of their customer context can be held within the same session in order for retrieval. We don't need separate retrieval service. Like I think we'll get there at some point. We're still not going to be at the point of saying, okay, this now replaces a human, because again, it's a fundamentally different type of processing. It's just like the computers grew up along with us. AI is growing up along with us. There's still those human tasks. And I think that's a part of getting into it as well, is we should not be focusing so much on how it's replacing, but instead how it continue to augment as we move along, which is, I think, the exciting part of the technology.
Yes. Like I like your perspective, right? Like let's say we did bet on continued exponential growth of context windows, right? And I don't know that it's been necessarily exponential, but it's been really great, like to your point as well. And then, we obviously have like Moore's law, right? Maybe chips continue to go wild from, we don't hit any physical limits or anything like that with silicon and whatnot. And, there's a lot to bet on for sure in the optimistic for AI case. In that case scenario, I do think there are like certain jobs that will be legitimately unnecessary. And I'll try and draw it back to like what's kind of possible today as well. So more revenue today can already be managed by the same team size. I think that's the biggest thing I'm seeing at startups is they're actually not taking an aggressive hiring approach to pre-sales members of their team. It's actually like much more stable growth on the team, despite how large their like actual business is growing. And I think it's a result of just being able to manage more. There's also more inexperienced SEs being hired and then quickly enabled to execute at a similar level to like more experienced folks in the org. And it's a little bit of a gamble, right? Because context isn't perfect, retrieval isn't perfect. So like in the fringe cases, like that inexperienced SE could fall on their face. But I think legitimately like larger enterprises are going for some of these more inexperienced hires because they're betting on AI being able to enable them on the knowledge work, right? Which is, knowledge is becoming a commodity, basically, is what we're saying. So if you're inexperienced but smart and talented, you can catch up and execute faster than ever. It's true in coding. It's true in SE world as well, right? Pre-sales land. And in general, I'd say subjective processes overall are becoming more automated, right? So we already talked about account research and meeting prep, but even like writing a business case, writing a proposal, writing a statement of work, things that like usually require expertise, putting together like a bill of materials. These are all things that like can be done in an automated fashion. Someone just needs to approve it. So what I think we'll be moving more and more towards is like a draft and approve type of work system in like a white collar work in general, where you can imagine like agentic AI putting together deliverables and work outputs across almost like a conveyor belt that someone is like effectively saying, yes, this was good quality assurance, so to speak. I don't think it'll be like that dramatic, right? Like the white collar factories, so to speak, in like pre-sales and sales world, at least, because there's relationships to build. There's people to talk to. I think as long as the buyers are people, the sellers are people. That's what it boils down to for me personally.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And that's the point that I see a lot of people skipping over is that, yes, there's a lot of part of our tasks that we could automate and get better at. And there's certainly things that if you talk to most SCs, like managing their Salesforce, like updates and pulling together a first draft of a statement of work, doing all those things that we should be able to automate is not the part of the role that SEs are like, yes, this is why I'm signing up to be a solutions consultant. It's because I really love project management, right? That's really not part of it. But the part that people sign up for is the people side, right? You sign up because you want to have those relationships. You want to work with people. You want to help understand someone's problems and figure out how, if what you sell can make their lives better, make their jobs better in some way. And that's what the buyer is looking for. I saw a post earlier today from someone, from actually Chris Mabry, the former GM of PreSales Collective, mentioning how people actually like salespeople because people want to buy from someone who's in sales. People want someone who's there advocating on their behalf, helping them to understand. And that's the part, that human touch, that's not going away in anything, really. But making our jobs easier the rest of the time helps us to be even better and have more time for the people that we're trying to sell to. Be able to answer their questions better, be able to have the resources that we need. I wanted to pause to highlight that because I think you're absolutely right. Like, as long as the people are buying, they're going to want to buy from people.
Yes, no, yeah. And just double click on your point as well. I think you're absolutely right. In the next, let's say 12 to 18 months, regardless of whether you're a startup or an enterprise, I think pre-sales will become more strategic, less project management, which AI can handle for you, more time spent really thinking about how to solution and consult a client, how to prove you're the right vendor to work with, highlighting your differentiation, building a technical relationship. I think all of that comes to the forefront.
So we talked a little about how it can work well for an enterprise, especially where we're kind of unlocking the ability to hire people who are earlier in their careers because they get to benefit from a lot of this automation. Have you seen that work well? And what works, I guess, if you're going to give advice to someone at a large enterprise?
Genuinely, as a large enterprise, it can work. It's because one of the big advantages that a large enterprise has that a small enterprise does not is that they already have playbooks, templates. They've got use case library, case study library, all this product knowledge base, competitive intelligence, things that have been built up over potentially decades in some of these organizations.
There's like some understanding of how this business is running already. We're not necessarily creating a new business in the here and now.
Yes, right. They're not figuring out product market fit in the worst case of a startup, right? They're refined and documented a ton of why what they do works. And so that enablement through just what we have today, context-based and retrieval-based, like chats, I think is just a great interface, right? When you just think about chat as a UI, it just works. People like chatting, they like texting. It's just an interface that works, lets you get exactly what you're retrieving. It's like querying a database, except you don't need to know how to query a database. So it works perfectly, right? It's just better search, semantic search, right? Is what we're talking about. So yeah, I think it works phenomenally for large orgs in particular.
You had mentioned kind of product market fit, those three magical words. I've definitely spent some time in my career at startups, and I kind of wish that it was as easy as typing into a chat interface, hey, give us product market fit now. Look over all of our data. It's not quite ready to do that kind of thing, but I agree. Coming up with, if you've got frameworks, you can give it some inputs. Say, we want to see how this much transaction volume will impact our revenues for this year, and give me 2 ideas on how we can unlock that as a business case. If you have that framework already, it's going to work a lot better.
Yeah, I think what's like larger companies are not doing so well is kind of really driving a top-down strategy for different parts of the org, really relying on their like individual contributors and members of the team to be the source of creativity. I think that's just a recipe for redundancy and inefficiency in building out the AI strategy. You really need like leadership that's AI forward, like looking to see where this technology goes and understanding like how it applies to their org today. And if they're not thinking that way and like it's not being, obviously you want to source ideas from the team, but if you're asking your team to do that implementation of the strategy, ultimately you're like spending tons of hours wasting time building the same stuff just by different members. So that's like the biggest weakness I see there. To your point though, just doubling back for a joke you made, I feel like it would actually be really funny if OpenAI or Anthropic or someone released the statistics of like founders asking ChatGPT, what should my product market fit strategy be?
Please fix my business right now. Yeah, that would definitely break some sort of contract,
for sure.
But I would really be interested in it too.
My name is on there too. There's definitely some limitations. I think everyone likes to test them and push it too. You get some really creative stuff out of AI for sure. But ultimately, like you got to know when it's just doing its best guess, right? And like where it's not, doesn't hold up to reality and all that.
I mean, there's something fun in that, right? Like ask the question, but you're not going to rely on it, but you want to know, like, I did this once when we were relaunching with the PreSales Collective's kind of new branding. I'd put together the thing, but I was like, I'm curious to know what would ChatGPT have spit if I just asked, hey, what should our direction be as a community? Some of the things I was like, that's an interesting idea I hadn't considered, but overall I was like, I'm glad I didn't just ask and then run with it. Because again, the context isn't there, the framework isn't there, the work that you need to do is just not going to be there from a language model taking suggestions from patterns it can see. Like that's just not going to be the path forward.
There's this paradox where in 2025, it's almost like every task should at least be considered through the realm of AI. I would agree. It's a great idea to try that, right? But you kind of have to know that it's not going to go 100% of the way there. It's almost like when you sit down at Thanksgiving dinner, maybe you're sat next to a really intelligent ant. Over the course of Thanksgiving dinner, you're not going to have enough time to give you the context to explain to your intelligent aunt how you are trying to solve a problem. And then she can give you back. She'll probably give you some good ideas, but she doesn't have all that understanding. She doesn't know all the people that you're working with. So AI is essentially just like that, but with a little less mashed potatoes. We've talked about that large enterprise. What if there is someone who is hoping that they can get there? There's this mid-stage SE, this mid-stage pre-sales leader. Where would you recommend that they go? Do we want to lean more towards what you mentioned and the advantages of kind of working quickly like a startup and being able to iterate fast and trust the inputs of the individual team members a lot? Or would you recommend them going more to like what we've talked about in the enterprise, maybe taking some of those bets on earlier team members and making sure that it's effective and top down?
One thing I'll just reframe from what I said earlier is like, you should always consider the inputs of everyone on your team, right? Like from an input perspective, collect data. No question about it. You don't know where the creativity is going to come from your org. But if you're relying on the execution to be bottoms up, like someone's going to build the process automation for meeting prep, or someone's going to build the thing for account research. Someone else is going to build our business case automation. Someone's going to build a custom GPT for RFP automation, or whatever it is. Like someone on the team is going to do it. That is going to turn to super redundant effort the bigger and bigger you get, right? Where it's not going to stay maintained. Two people are working on the same thing. They have different versions. Whose is better? All of this stuff just breaks down completely the bigger you get, especially at enterprise scale. I just do not think that is the approach at all. It's like bottoms up implementation. But that's just a reframe there. So inputs, super important to get from everybody. I'd say for a mid-size pre-sales leader, right? Mid-size org, let's say they've got about 10 SEs on their team, maybe 5, maybe 20, maybe 30, something around that size. I would definitely be leaning enterprise style. You're forward-looking, you're a growing company, you're planning to grow. I would even recommend like leaner teams to be thinking forward, right? Like how do we enable not just the current team, but the like next X hires on the team? How do we take all of this tremendous knowledge and value that the SE org and pre-sales org produces in general and like enable other parts of the revenue org, right? Because that's what pre-sales is a lot about half the time, right? Is like we enable the post-sale org, we enable the AEs, we enable product org, we enable the marketing org. And if our AI strategy doesn't also do that, then we don't have a real pre-sales AI strategy, right? All we've done is automate very specific niche things. So how is our tooling actually helping these other orgs that also rely on us at scale? I would definitely be leaning towards forward-looking enterprise top-down type of strategic thinking, but let the inputs come from anywhere, but implementation or wide, not at the individual bottoms up kind of share what you build. I don't think that's the way to go.
We kind of talked about where things were at last year, but if you're thinking about we're going to be sitting in August of 2026 or maybe towards the end of next year, how do you see AI continuing to reshape the pre-sales role kind of at that point and beyond, regardless of where you're at or maybe within the context of the different company stages?
Yeah, regardless of company stage. And if we're talking about the end of 2026, early 2027, I think we're headed down a lot of the themes that we've discussed so far. I'd say high level, like revenue teams are managing a lot more revenue per team member. That would be true for pre-sales orgs as well as AEs. So like more accounts, more prospects per team member, I think it's just likely. There's upside that comes with that, but there's also going to be some losers in that change, right? And that sucks, but that's the reality I would expect. I think there'll be more inexperienced SEs being hired and quickly being enabled better and better, enabled to execute at like a senior level, especially in the larger companies, right? So enterprise is going to be able to take advantage of some kind of cost arbitrage, right? Hiring less experienced people, maybe even hiring offshore people, enabling them quickly, somehow getting even better leverage on these types of private equity techniques, right? So it's not going to be fun, but I do see that happening. It'll kind of leave the more experienced SEs to either position themselves strategically within the org as like leaders of scaled processes, or effectively working for maybe startups, right? That need that help and that experience early on and don't have all those nice resources to like enable someone that's inexperienced. So we'll see probably a bit of a shift of experienced SEs moving towards working for startups and sharing their experience there. But overall, on the more optimistic side, I think pre-sales will become this very strategic role, and we'll have a lot less like minutia to deal with in our roles, a lot less project management, a lot less updates and status and documents and bill of materials and prep and all the things that just kind of hold you back from being a really customer obsessed solution consultant. And that will be really exciting. And genuinely, the people who are thriving in the pre-sales roles a year and a half from now will absolutely love their job. And so it's going to be a case of how do you put yourself in that position versus not being one of those people that's driving revenue for the business at scale and like being a great consultant, being a great strategist.
I love the perspective it's going to help SEs love their jobs more, because I think you're right. Like everything we're seeing is saying we're going to continue to make the parts you don't like less unlikable, which I think is exciting for everybody, right? It's easy to lose sight of that at times when we see all these changes coming with stuff AI and even the change of how many things you're owning. But hey, if you're liking more of the job you're doing, able to do more of the parts of your job you like, that's beneficial, right? That's a big win.
And one thing to reframe for the startups in particular that are listening is like, I don't think people will be losing their jobs at startups, unless the startup itself fails. I don't think pre-sales roles in startups are going to get cut. It's just going to be like more prospects, more revenue per head. If anything, you might get paid more. Ultimately, it just means your team size is growing at a lesser size, but like you're actually getting more deals to your plate. So for the startups, it's not that much of a problem. It's like we are going further, faster, and more efficiently. I think it's really the big enterprises that are already heavily laden with like a lot of solutions engineers on their team that are going to make some pretty drastic decisions at some point about like having thousands of people, have thousands of SEs on the payroll. Is it actually necessary? That's like the scale where things are going to happen in a negative way, but not nearly as badly as like software engineering has been impacted, but still an impact. So overall, like I wouldn't want it to be like positioned in like, oh, we're going to lose our jobs. But I do think it's much more startups are going to grow. And I think pre-sales is like not a huge number of people out there. They're very flexible roles, but it's always worth talking about like AI and the workforce, right? The labor force. What's the impact going to be? I think in general, being in pre-sales, it's like a great role to be in because it's strategic, because it's sales oriented, because it's people oriented. There's not going to be a total replacement of the person. But I think to put yourself in a closet and assume like your skills today will be the same skills you need a year and a half from now, that would be a total mistake for sure.
Well, we are about out of time here. And so, Akash, before we go, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to find out more about Opine, if they're interested in getting kind of a little bit of this started with your help, how can they get a hold of you and reach out?
Yeah, for sure. So Akash@tryopine.com. You can email me directly. I'm also on LinkedIn. My full name's Akash Ganapathi. It's probably somewhere in here. The CEO of Opine, so you might be able to find me that way. Happy to talk to anybody. And realistically, I think the most exciting things you could do as an SE or an SE leader right now is be the one owning the AI strategy for pre-sales in your organization and driving the entire change management through the revenue org. There's an opportunity right now where every revenue org is trying to figure out what their AI strategy is. And pre-sales is a critical part of that strategy. They're probably the most important role in the entire revenue org, in my opinion, at least. And so being instrumental to that strategy, people are looking for these ideas at any level. It doesn't matter if you're an SE, it's an individual level. And obviously, if you're a revenue leader, now's the time. Own this change. And there's so much to like gain realistically.
Absolutely fantastic conversation. I'm sorry that we're out of time, but Akash, thank you so much. Matthew as well. Thank you for joining me. And we'll see everyone on the next episode. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the PreSales podcast by PreSales Collective. The PreSales podcast is recorded on our live show, PreSales Live, with a live Q&A at the end of each episode. For more information on the PreSales podcast, to listen to past episodes, and to know how to join an upcoming recording, visit presalescollective.com/podcast.